So Chelsea's pre-season is over and done with. Enzo Maresca and his players now move on to the serious stuff against Man City on Sunday as the Premier League season begins. But I wanted to take time to kind of look back at the pre-season of this summer and kind of pick out 4 things that we learned from Chelsea, positive and negative, regarding what could be coming when the serious stuff begins, tactical things, players, Enzo Maresca's approach, things that could develop, could get better, and things actually to be hopeful about is how we're going to end this show to try and keep it a little bit more upbeat. So let's jump into it. Please do give me your thoughts in the comments if there's anything you notice from pre-season that maybe I don't touch on in the show. And please do hit the like button if you're enjoying the content, subscribe, all of that good stuff, but let's jump into it. The first thing is that the Highline is an issue. Now, this was something that Enzo Maresca kind of got headlines for after the game against Real Madrid in America quite recently, effectively blaming the issue of Chelsea's defensive Highline being uncoordinated on Mauricio Pochettino. Now, at the time, I could sort of understand that, yeah, you're transitioning from one coach to another, you're moving to a different system, there's a pressing system that we will talk about later in this show that he's trying to implement, and of course that can't be done overnight. But the idea that Chelsea played this radically stupid Highline or a Highline that was a problem last year wasn't really the case. I mean, the reality of Chelsea under Mauricio Pochettino was that Thiago Silva played a lot of the season for Pochettino. There were brief spells because of injury or form that he was taken out of the team, but especially the way the season ended, Silva was one of Chelsea's regular centre-backs, and he was kind of a senior figure in quite a young dressing room. So Chelsea didn't quite play the Highline. Who did play a Highline? That, of course, was Leicester under Enzo Maresca. So I found those comments a little bit strange, given that this is something clearly he wants to implement. And it's not that these things need to be perfect within a couple of games of pre-season, obviously not. But, you know, it is something that I think he's obviously owning and needs to own if it doesn't go well, and he needs to improve. And I think clearly the Real Madrid game was an obvious example of how teams, especially on transition, can really exploit and hurt Chelsea. So this is a great example here for the first goal. And both goals were kind of quite similar in the way they were constructed. We saw Levi Colwill, Benoit Badiashile, and Malo Gusto effectively forming this back three, but it's quite stationary and it's quite easy for a runner from the opposition to find that space. There's not a lot of awareness or coordination through the defence, and it's easy for Real Madrid to get through. And it was the same with Vinicius Junior, yes, slightly up the pitch, but we saw now Reece James, Levi Colwill, and Benoit Badiashile forming a back three here. And again, a run in behind, in between the centre-back, simply not good enough. The coordination wasn't there. Celtic were another team that really exploited Chelsea's high line, as we can take a look here. Now, in a sense, you're probably thinking Highline, we're going to go towards the literally on the halfway line, and a team is going to play the ball beyond us. And that did happen several times against Celtic, but it's also how Chelsea are defending, especially I saw against Inter Milan, around their own box, kind of keeping this very straight line, as you can see here. And it's pretty good. It's contained, it's narrow, it's what you want. It's trying to constrict space, it's trying to force Celtic out wide where, you know, not into the danger zone, away from your own goal. But the problem, again, comes from coordination. And it's all right having this set up. You have enough players feasibly there to be good defensively, to stop shots going at goal. But the moment Celtic played around Chelsea, played a few passes, how quickly they were undone. The lack of pressure on the ball has been a consistent theme. And as you can see here, this is what led to Matt O'Reilly's opener, where he gets into the box. He has enough space to open up his body and curl a shot into the bottom corner. Same here for the second goal. Yes, you can see here effectively a clear line, a back four. And I guess feasibly, again, you could go, well, they seem to be okay set up here, but again, Celtic move wide, and the moment that ball gets played into the box, it's completely disorganised. There's no longer a line, there's no chance of catching Celtic offside, and it's an easy tap in for them, 2-0. So this is something that for me is a real issue in terms of this high line, and I know people say that a lot of teams do play this, but it needs to be coordinated. Players need to have good relationships with each other. You need to have enough mobility and in that defence, and it also relies on players further up the pitch that we're going to get to in the next point. Man-v-man marking. So this is something that clearly Enzo Maresca has stated very clearly he wants to move to for Chelsea, and we saw this especially across pre-season, but the game I was at, Inter Milan, we saw this. And here's a great example. So this is in the build-up to the Inter Milan opener, and you can basically see here a form of man-v-man pressing. You've got Mikhailo Mudryk, Mark Guiu, Kenan Dewsbury-Hall, Noni Madueke, and Romeo Lavia all marking their individual opponents. Now, in one sense, this is good. You know, you've got pressure on the ball, you've got pressure on your opponent. But the issue with man-v-man marking is it very much is dependent on your players doing their jobs properly, as with any system, but how quickly that can be opened up if that structure, if that man-v-man structure is opened up and suddenly weird gaps appear. And this is something that I saw quite regularly with other man-v-man systems, but I saw it quite regularly for Bielsa at Leeds, where if a player takes the ball and starts running directly with it, sometimes because you're so tightly regimented to this man-v-man marking, players are kind of unsure what they're supposed to do. Are they still supposed to be marking their man? Are they supposed to go towards the ball? And this is something that was clearly exploited by Inter Milan, who didn't actually create a lot during the game, but Basek here takes the ball from central defence, a right-sided centre-back, and just decides to drive through the centre of the pitch and has already taken out several Chelsea players, and he suddenly got several good passing options. And it's quite clear to me that already Chelsea players in midfield, in defence, are still unsure maybe what they're supposed to do in these situations. Are they supposed to go towards the ball? They're kind of left in no man's land, and already Correa has the ball in between the lines. They've bypassed Chelsea's midfield, and Thuram, who had a brilliant first half, was able to be played through and finish ruthlessly. And again, here you see Wesley Fofana, Levi Colwill didn't have a great first half. The lack of communication there, I think, is a real issue. It still seems to me like things need to be ironed out with Chelsea's defence. They don't look like a cohesive unit, and I'm not just talking about the back four, the back three. I'm also talking about midfield, in attack. Those things will be exploited by very good teams, and it's something, of course, Maresca needs to work on. So the man-v-man system, if you are playing it correctly, can be intense. It can be suffocating for the opponent, and I can understand why Enzo Maresca wants to play it, because it worked for him at Leicester in terms of recovering the ball high up the pitch. That's the aim of pressing quite generally. But I think the wider concern is if it isn't coordinated properly, like any press, if you're not doing it properly, if you don't have players who are good off the ball as well as on the ball, especially in central midfield, those gaps will massively open up and Chelsea could be carved open a number of times this season. Number 3 is losing possession in our own third. I think this is quite an obvious thing, and it's something that even Enzo Maresca seems to accept early on. I don't know how accepting Chelsea fans and just generally people will be if this continues into the season when Chelsea start losing points because of it. And of course this is linked to the goalkeeper, but I think one of the most obvious examples was against Man City, and really I think something that Chelsea have to be wary of is what Man City could do on Sunday at Stamford Bridge, but just generally how teams may look to hurt Chelsea, especially if they have the players to press and to harry and to go on the attack quite frequently, because both Celtic and Man City pressed Chelsea aggressively in their own half, and Chelsea were forced into a number of errors. And this is something that I find really concerning, especially when Chelsea come up against a higher level of opposition, which isn't always going to be the case, but it's something you have to be thinking of if this is going to be kind of the standard way Chelsea look to build up from the back and how easily it's exploited. So Man City, they smelt blood. Pep Guardiola knew what Maresca was going to bring for Chelsea, and he looked at ways to exploit it, and he did it pretty consistently. And yes, these are unforced errors. These are errors by Chelsea players, and maybe you could argue that in 6 months' time these errors aren't happening, but they are things that happen when you do put a team under severe pressure, when you sort of cut down their thinking time to make passes. And if they're not the best passer, if technically they're not that sufficient or coherent, and they have the ability to work out of tight areas with opponents sort of tracking them down, this is a real problem. So Man City, of course, this is the second goal. Closed down, Moises Caicedo, it's a loose pass, and of course the one player you don't want it to fall to, Erling Haaland, finishes. Another example here in the second half, playing passes that just simply shouldn't be played. And I think this is the variety and adaptability that Maresca is going to have as a coach, because if a team are pressing us, if they are a really good team, if Chelsea are struggling to find those combinations in defence that get them out of a press, is there anything wrong with playing the ball forward and trying to get the team further up the pitch? At least you aren't cheaply losing the ball. This is something I think theory-wise and just objectively, I think is going to be a big discussion point if this isn't resolved at Chelsea, because it starts to feel a little bit more intellectual and not actually like we're trying to play serious football. You know, are you trying to pass it round the back because you feel that it works with your current squad, or are you wedded to these ideas no matter how bad they look with the players you've got? And that, of course, is part of coaching, part of management, is adapting to your situation and to your squad. So again, Man City closing Chelsea down en route for the fourth goal, very similar, losing the ball, and Man City, because they have the technical capability, play a nice couple of passes. And this is similar to the way Inter Milan scored against Chelsea and Real Madrid. It only took 1 or 2 passes for them to bypass Chelsea's midfield and suddenly exploiting and running at Chelsea's defence where there are holes to exploit, and this is exactly what Erling Haaland did. But another example here, Celtic, and Robert Sanchez is involved in this one. And it's just playing passes that just are stupid. I have no issue with using your goalkeeper as maybe a third centre-back, of playing out from the back, if you want to call it, as lazily as that, or trying to build up from deep if you have the players in that area in terms of goalkeeper, but also in terms of centre-backs if you want to invite a press on, if you want to find space behind the press, which obviously is there. And it's not a new style of playing football, but I do find it quite baffling now. I've seen it from Brighton, we see it from Chelsea this pre-season, we see it with many teams where a pass just really doesn't need to be played. And this is a great example here. Benoit Badiashile is played kind of into trouble by Sanchez. It's not a great pass by Sanchez because he will see that there are two Celtic players very much charging in on Benoit Badiashile. He doesn't have a lot of time to think. He has to make a first-time pass, and he tries to play it towards Tosin, and of course it's intercepted, and it leads to Celtic's third goal. So this is something that I think is going to be a big topic of conversation for Chelsea fans. And it's really how much damage Maresca and Chelsea in general are willing to take to see it maybe come out the other side looking better. Because I still have firm questions over a player like Sanchez, that there are limitations within the squad, that as much as work you can do on a training ground, as much as you believe this style and giving confidence and assurance to the players that if they keep sticking with this, it's going to work. But there is just other variables in football where if you keep conceding in this way, teams are going to harass you, they're going to smell blood, and they're going to hurt Chelsea on a number of occasions. So it's just not that you never pass the ball out from the back, you always look to hoof it. Obviously, that's stupid. But it's about, I think, understanding the game state, understanding the opponent you're coming up against, and really trying to adapt your game because of that. I really don't want to see Chelsea be playing the same way they would against a team that's going to harass them from the off, a team like Liverpool, Arsenal and Man City, as they would against Ipswich, who are probably going to sit back, where you're probably not going to be worried about us being harassed in our own 6-yard box. So I think that's something that's obviously going to need to be looked at and assessed during the course of the season. But I think the one positive that came from pre-season is Chelsea can very much still create chances. Now, this may seem like kind of a general point or kind of a not as specific a point, but I do think it's something that does give me some hope as we walk into the season. Because one of my big fears about moving away from Mauricio Pochettino and kind of moving to a more positional, rigid style of possession play is we saw under Thomas Tuchel, we saw in brief spells under Maurizio Sarri how stifling and how sluggish that football can be if not played correctly, and especially under Tuchel how limited Chelsea were in attack, how little they created good looks at goal. The good thing I've seen throughout the course of pre-season is Chelsea are still creating good looks at goal. They are still able to find opportunities, even in moments in games where they've been 2 or 3-0 down. They still have the confidence to get forward, find those rotations, and players individually are so talented that they will open up space. I'm looking at the likes of course, Cole Palmer and Christopher Nkunku, who I think will be integral for Enzo Maresca this season. But even Mark Guiu obviously has impressed the way he's pressed from the front, and even him creating some of his own opportunities. Noni Madueke is a little bit of a loose cannon at times, but I think has been more positive than negative. And of course, Enzo Fernandez, as he came back into the team, did create some good opportunities. Romeo Lavia's passing from deep. And just looking at some of the numbers here, just generally against Man City, Chelsea did create a number of big chances, actually more big chances in the game. It was the same against Real Madrid, more big chances than Real Madrid, but of course they did beat us 2-1. And then also, of course, against Inter Milan in the final game, Chelsea very valid of a 1-1 draw. Actually, given the quality of chances in the second half, they probably could have won that game. And even in the first half, Jan Sommer was forced into some saves. So it's really hoping that Maresca can improve and just continue what was going on last season, because that was one of the big positives about Pochettino's time. Yes, defensively, like now, Chelsea have real concerns. They conceded a lot of goals, but one of the things you cannot argue against was productivity from the final third was absolutely there, or at least the creativity was absolutely there. And it's probably why Chelsea are still looking and pursuing the signature of Victor Osimhen, because if you were to add a killer, someone who is going to ruthlessly finish those chances, Chelsea, despite looking ragged in defence, could still maybe outscore some teams. So that is something to be positive about. So those are the 4 things we learned from pre-season. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.